The countryside breathed in slow rhythm. The hum of cicadas, the whisper of wind brushing through tall grass, the smell of rain that had fallen earlier that morning. David stood on the porch of the old farmhouse, his hands resting on the railing worn smooth by years of weather and time. From there, the fields rolled endlessly into the horizon, bathed in the soft gold of a setting sun. It should have been peaceful, but peace was the last thing he felt. He had come to help repair the house after his wife's father passed. Just until things settle, she'd said. But until had turned into months. And in those months, something unspoken had begun to take shape between him and Eleanor, his wife's mother. She wasn't like anyone he'd ever met. There was grace in her restraint, in the way she moved through silence as if she understood it better than words. He remembered the first time he saw her, sunlight spilling through the kitchen window, her fingers trailing across the edge of a mug as if lost in thought. She had looked up, met his eyes, and for one impossible heartbeat, something had stirred. A warmth, an ache, something he wasn't ready to name. That warmth hadn't faded. If anything, it grew. David. Her voice came from behind him now. Soft, but enough to pull him from the thoughts he tried so hard to bury. He turned, forcing a small smile. Hey. Didn't hear you. Eleanor stepped onto the porch, her hair loosely pinned, strands catching the light. There was a stillness about her that both calmed and unsettled him. You've been standing out here for a while, she said. You look miles away. Just thinking, he replied, staring back at the horizon. She joined him at the railing, a careful distance between them. The air changed. It always did when she was near. He could feel it, the awareness of her presence, the quiet gravity that drew him in without a word. Do you like it here? She asked after a pause. The countryside. I do, he said. It's quieter than I'm used to. Gives you too much time to think. Her lips curved in a faint smile. That can be dangerous. He laughed softly, but the sound caught in his throat. Yeah, I'm starting to realize that. Silence settled again, thick but not uncomfortable. The sun slipped lower, painting her features in warm light. He looked at her, really looked, and for a second forgot the world around them. The air felt heavy with things they couldn't say. David, she said gently, her tone shifting. You've done so much for this house, for us. I hope you know how grateful we are. He wanted to tell her that gratitude wasn't why he stayed. That he'd stopped counting the repairs weeks ago. That lately it was something else, someone else keeping him there. Instead he only nodded. It's nothing. I like being useful. Eleanor turned toward him then, her eyes soft but searching. You remind me of him, she said quietly. Your husband. She nodded. He used to stand here like this at the end of the day, watching the sky. Always looked like he was waiting for something. David swallowed, unsure what to say. The weight of her words hung between them, grief and longing intertwined with something dangerously tender. When she finally looked away, he let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. That night, David couldn't sleep. The wind pressed against the windows, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers and rain. Every creak of the old house felt amplified in the dark. He turned over, trying to quiet his thoughts, but all he could see was Eleanor's face in the sunset glow, the look in her eyes when she spoke of her late husband, and the flicker of something else beneath it. He got up and went downstairs, drawn to the faint light in the kitchen. Eleanor was there, her robe wrapped loosely around her, making tea. I didn't mean to wake anyone, he said quietly. You didn't, she replied, turning toward him. I couldn't sleep either. He nodded, standing by the doorway, unsure if he should stay. The air felt too still, too intimate. Would you like some? She asked, gesturing toward the kettle. Sure, he said, his voice low. She poured 2 cups and handed one to him. Her fingers brushed his, light, fleeting, but it was enough to send a current through him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. It's strange, she said finally, her eyes fixed on the steam rising from her cup. After my husband passed, I thought the house would feel empty forever. But lately. She stopped herself, shaking her head slightly. Never mind. David's heart pounded. Lately what? Eleanor hesitated, then looked up. Her gaze met his, steady and unreadable. Lately it doesn't feel quite as empty. The words hung in the air. Soft, simple but charged. David wanted to look away, to deflect, to retreat into the safety of distance. But he couldn't. He set the cup down carefully on the counter. Eleanor, he began, though he didn't know what would follow. She took a small step back, sensing the same danger he did. It's late, she said quietly. We should get some rest. He nodded, but neither of them moved for several seconds. The silence stretched, thick with everything unspoken. Then, with a faint smile that was both apology and farewell, she turned and left the room. David stayed behind, staring at the spot where she'd stood. His chest ached, with guilt, confusion, and something that felt alarmingly like longing. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees. The farmhouse creaked, alive with memory and shadow. And in that quiet hour, David knew something had shifted, something neither of them could name, but both would feel in every glance from that night forward. The next morning dawned soft and pale, the mist rolling low across the fields. David woke early, though he hadn't really slept. The memory of the previous night lingered, the way her voice had softened, the way her eyes had searched his. Every sound in the quiet house seemed louder now. The kettle whistling, the floorboards creaking, the faint hum of the wind against the windows. He stepped outside, needing the air. The world beyond the farmhouse felt endless, green and open and forgiving in a way he wasn't. The fields were still damp with dew, the sky a muted gray. He tried to lose himself in the work, in the rhythm of his hands repairing fences, but no matter how hard he tried, her presence filled the spaces between his thoughts. By midday, Eleanor appeared at the edge of the yard. She wore a light blue dress that moved with the wind, simple but somehow elegant. She carried a basket of bread and fruit, her eyes finding him almost immediately. You've been at it since sunrise, she said, setting the basket on the fence post. You should take a break. David smiled faintly, wiping sweat from his brow. Trying to make myself useful. You already are. It was a small thing to say, but the way she said it, soft, sincere, made his chest tighten. They sat together beneath the shade of an old oak, sharing the food in silence at first. The air was warm, heavy with the smell of grass and wildflowers. A bee circled lazily between them before drifting away. Do you ever think about starting over? Eleanor asked suddenly. David looked up, surprised by the question. Starting over? She nodded. A different life. Different choices. He hesitated. Sometimes. But I guess we all think about that, don't we? Maybe, she said, her gaze distant. But most of us are too afraid to imagine it fully. He studied her face, the way her expression softened when she spoke. There was a quiet sadness there, something deep and private. You don't seem afraid of much, he said. Eleanor smiled faintly. That's only because you don't know me very well. David almost laughed, but the sound caught in his throat. Maybe I'd like to. The words slipped out before he could stop them, carried on impulse, on something that had been building for too long. Eleanor's eyes met his, and for a heartbeat neither moved. The air seemed to thicken, time slowing until all that existed was the space between them. Small, fragile, electric. Then she looked away, her voice calm but distant. You shouldn't say things like that. I know, he whispered. But even as he said it, he didn't regret it. That evening, clouds gathered over the fields. A storm rolled in, low thunder echoing across the valley. Eleanor stood by the window, watching the rain blur the world beyond the glass. David entered quietly, his shirt still damp from being caught outside. I didn't think it would come down this fast, he said, brushing water from his hair. She turned slightly, smiling. The storms always move quickly here. They surprise you. He stepped closer to the window, their reflections meeting in the glass. Lightning flashed, illuminating their faces, hers calm and composed, his restless and uncertain. "It's strange," David said after a moment. "This house, it feels alive, like it remembers everything." Eleanor nodded. "It does. Every sound, every silence, every secret." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, it felt as if she were talking about something more than the house. The rain drummed against the roof, a constant, soothing rhythm. They stood side by side, close enough for him to feel the warmth of her shoulder through the thin fabric of her sleeve. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. The silence between them was heavy but not empty, filled instead with all the things they could never say aloud. Then Eleanor turned to him, her expression unreadable. "David, you should get some rest. You've been working yourself too hard." "I'm fine," he said quietly. "I like being here." Something flickered in her eyes. Gratitude, sorrow, something in between. "You remind me of how I used to feel about this place," she said softly. "Before it became complicated." He wanted to ask what she meant, but something in her tone stopped him. Instead he said, "Maybe it's not too late to feel that way again." Eleanor smiled, faint but real. "You always say the right things, don't you?" "I don't know about that." She looked at him for a long moment, the stormlight catching in her eyes. "Yes," she said finally. "I think you do." Later, when the storm faded and the world outside grew quiet again, David sat in the dim light of the workshop, staring at the tools on the bench. The house creaked around him, settling into stillness. He thought of his wife, away for the week visiting her sister, and felt a pang of guilt twist inside him. Nothing had happened, and yet it felt as though everything had. He heard soft footsteps behind him. Eleanor stood in the doorway, her expression calm, almost careful. "I didn't mean to disturb you," she said. "You're not," he replied. She stepped inside, glancing around at the half-finished shelves and scattered nails. "You've done a lot," she said. "It's starting to feel like home again." He met her gaze. "Is that a good thing?" "I think so," she said quietly. "Though sometimes I wonder what home really means anymore." For a while they just stood there, listening to the faint sound of crickets outside. The air between them felt fragile, a balance of longing and restraint. "Eleanor," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper, "if I ever cross a line—" "You won't," she interrupted gently, "because you know where it is." He nodded, though the truth was more complicated than either wanted to admit. When she left, the faint scent of her perfume lingered in the air, soft, familiar, inescapable. David leaned back against the table, closing his eyes. The storm had passed, but the tension hadn't. It was still there, quiet but unbroken, alive in every glance, every shared silence. He knew it wouldn't fade easily. Outside, the moon rose over the fields, silver light spilling through the windows. The house was still, but his thoughts were anything but. Somewhere upstairs, Eleanor's light went out, and he felt the ache of it. The distance, the closeness, the impossible pull of something that could never be. And as he stood there, listening to the steady rhythm of the rain's aftermath, David realized that the most dangerous kind of love wasn't the one spoken aloud, but the one buried deep, waiting in the quiet, where words would only make it real. The morning her daughter returned, the air in the farmhouse seemed different, sharper, heavier, as if the walls themselves were bracing for what they already knew. Eleanor stood by the kitchen window, watching the narrow road that cut through the fields. She had barely slept. The storm from the night before had left everything damp and glittering, but inside her chest, a quieter, more dangerous storm had taken root. David had left early to pick up groceries in town. She was grateful. It gave her time to think, to compose herself, to remind her heart of all the rules it was supposed to follow. When she heard the sound of a car pulling up the gravel drive, she froze. The door opened, and laughter spilled in, warm, familiar, and uncomfortably real. "Mom!" her daughter called, stepping into the kitchen, her arms full of bags. "I missed this place. It smells the same." Eleanor smiled, but it felt practiced. "Welcome home, Lily." They hugged, and for a moment everything felt simple again. Mother and daughter surrounded by the comfort of routine. But then Lily began talking about David. How much she missed him, how strange it was to be apart even for a few weeks. And Eleanor felt the walls close in just a little more. By the time David returned, the sun had climbed high. He stepped through the door carrying boxes, his eyes meeting Eleanor's for the briefest second before flicking toward his wife. "Hey you," Lily said, rushing to him. "Finally." He laughed, setting the boxes down to catch her in his arms. It was genuine, or maybe it wasn't. Eleanor couldn't tell anymore. For the rest of the day, the house was alive again, with conversation, movement, laughter that echoed through the halls. Yet beneath it all, Eleanor felt the quiet current of something she couldn't name. Every word, every glance between her and David was laced with invisible meaning. When Lily went upstairs to unpack, David lingered in the kitchen under the pretense of helping clean up. Eleanor was rinsing the dishes, her back to him. "How was the trip?" he asked quietly, careful to keep his tone light. "Good," she replied, her voice steady. "It's nice to have her back." He hesitated. "Yeah, it is." There was a pause, long enough for the air to shift again. She could feel his eyes on her, could feel the tension building in the silence. "David," she said softly without turning around, "things need to go back to normal now." "I know." But the words sounded like a lie, even to him. That evening, dinner felt like a play. Everyone smiling, laughing at old stories, pretending nothing had changed. Eleanor found herself studying them, her daughter and her son-in-law, watching how easily they moved together, how effortless it all seemed. But every now and then, she caught David's gaze across the table. It was never long, never obvious, but each time, her breath faltered just a little. After dinner, Lily suggested a walk through the fields. David agreed, and Eleanor stayed behind, claiming to be tired. She watched them from the window as they disappeared into the tall grass, two silhouettes swallowed by the fading light. For a moment she felt relief. And then something else, something darker. When they returned, laughter trailed behind them. Lily leaned into David's shoulder as they stepped inside, brushing rain from her hair. He smiled, the same smile that once felt private, that now belonged to someone else again. That night, Eleanor stood by her window long after the house went dark. The moonlight washed over the fields, turning everything to silver. Somewhere downstairs the floor creaked. Footsteps. Hers. His. She didn't move. She only listened, heart racing, until silence returned. She lay awake until dawn. The next morning brought visitors. A neighbor, Mrs. Cartwright, stopped by with a basket of apples and an appetite for gossip. She spoke of everything and everyone, but her voice lowered when she mentioned David. "You're lucky to have such a helpful son-in-law," the woman said with a knowing smile. "Always see him around when Lily's away. You two must get along well." Eleanor forced a polite laugh. "We manage." The woman's eyes lingered a moment too long. "People talk, you know. Small town and all." The rest of the conversation blurred. When the neighbor finally left, Eleanor stood by the door, her pulse hammering. "People talk." The words echoed in her head like a warning. Later she found David by the shed, sanding down an old chair. "We need to be careful," she said, keeping her voice low. He looked up sharply. "What happened?" "Nothing," she lied. "Just, people notice things. That's all." David set the sandpaper aside, stepping closer. "Eleanor, we haven't done anything." She met his eyes. "You think that matters?" For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension hung heavy, thick with everything unsaid. Then she turned and walked back toward the house, leaving him standing there, caught between guilt and frustration. That evening, Lily mentioned over dinner that Mrs. Cartwright had stopped by. "She told me you and David have been working together a lot," she said with a teasing smile. "Guess I should be jealous." Eleanor froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. David laughed a little too quickly. "Just fixing things. You know how your mom is. Can't sit still if something's broken." Lily smiled, oblivious to the undercurrent. That's true. Eleanor forced herself to laugh too, though her heart was racing. After dinner, when the others had gone upstairs, Eleanor stood alone in the kitchen. The room felt colder somehow. She ran her hand over the counter, the faint scent of rain still lingering from earlier. This was how it had to be. Quiet, careful, contained. She'd spent her life protecting others, keeping things from falling apart. But now, she realized, she was the one holding something fragile, something that couldn't survive in the light of day. And she wasn't sure how much longer she could keep it hidden. The rain returned 2 nights later. It came suddenly, sweeping across the fields in sheets, drumming against the windows with a fury that matched the storm inside Eleanor's heart. She sat in the darkened living room, the faint glow of a lamp casting long shadows across the walls. The sound of laughter drifted faintly from upstairs, Lily and David talking softly behind their door. Eleanor closed her eyes. Every sound was a reminder of the line she had drawn for herself, and how dangerously close she had come to crossing it. She told herself it was nothing, that what had happened, or hadn't happened, was a passing emotion, a trick of loneliness. But when she saw David in the mornings, when their eyes met even for a moment, that fragile lie shattered. It was becoming too much to bear. She rose, unable to sit still any longer, and moved toward the kitchen. The house felt alive in the storm. Every creak, every flicker of light seemed to echo her unease. She was pouring a glass of water when she heard footsteps behind her. Couldn't sleep either. David's voice was low, hesitant. He turned. He stood by the doorway, his hair tousled, his expression guarded. For a moment neither spoke. The rain filled the silence between them. "No," she said finally. "Too many thoughts." He nodded, stepping closer. "I know what you mean." "Do you?" she asked quietly, searching his face. David hesitated, then said, "Yes, I think I do." Something in his tone made her heart ache. He wasn't confessing, not openly, but his eyes said everything. She looked away, her hand tightening around the glass. "This can't go on," she whispered. "I know. You have to mean it, David." "I do." His voice broke a little. "But it doesn't make it easier." The storm raged outside, thunder shaking the windows. Eleanor turned back to him, her eyes bright with emotion. "You love her," she said. "You married her. You built a life with her. Don't throw that away because of whatever this is." "It's not just whatever this is," he said, almost pleading. "You know it isn't." She took a step back, shaking her head. "Don't. Please don't say that." But the words were already out in the air, impossible to take back. They stood there, 2 souls bound by what they couldn't admit, the storm outside roaring like a warning. Then faintly from upstairs a sound. Movement. They froze. A door creaked open above them. Footsteps again, lighter this time, uncertain. Lily's voice, half asleep, drifted down the stairs. "David. Mom. Is everything okay?" Eleanor's pulse stopped. She stepped back quickly, setting the glass down with trembling hands. "Just the storm," she called, forcing steadiness into her voice. "It woke me up." "Oh," Lily murmured, still drowsy. "All right. Go back to sleep soon, okay?" "Of course," Eleanor said. Lily lingered for a moment, then disappeared again, her footsteps fading down the hall. The silence that followed was unbearable. David exhaled shakily. "I should go," he said, his voice barely audible. "Yes," Eleanor whispered. "You should." He turned to leave but paused at the doorway. "Eleanor, for what it's worth, I never meant to hurt anyone." She closed her eyes. "I know." When he was gone, she leaned against the counter, her body trembling with the weight of everything that almost happened and everything that couldn't. Outside, the storm began to ease, leaving only the soft patter of rain against the windows. A slow, steady rhythm, like the beating of a heart learning how to quiet itself. The following days passed in uneasy calm. Nothing was said, but everything had changed. Eleanor avoided being alone with David, and he, in turn, buried himself in work. Lily didn't seem to notice the distance between them, or if she did, she mistook it for exhaustion. One afternoon, while packing preserves in the pantry, Eleanor overheard a conversation outside. Lily's voice, light and teasing. "You've been quiet lately," she said to David. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," he answered too quickly. "Just tired. From Mom's projects." Lily laughed. "She always finds something to fix." David's silence stretched too long. Eleanor's hands froze mid-motion. She could almost hear the effort it took for him to keep his tone casual when he finally replied. "Yeah, that's just who she is." Lily chuckled and said something else, but Eleanor didn't hear. The jar slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. The sound startled them both. Lily rushed inside, concerned, while David stayed by the doorway, his face pale. "Mom, are you all right?" Lily asked, helping her pick up the broken pieces. "I'm fine," Eleanor said, forcing a smile. "Clumsy, that's all." But when their eyes met, hers and David's, the truth passed silently between them. This can't continue. That night, Eleanor wrote a letter. Not a confession, not an explanation, just a few lines she needed to release from her chest. There are moments in life that belong to silence, not because they are wrong, but because they are too fragile for the world to carry. Some things are meant only to be felt, not lived. She folded the paper neatly and tucked it away inside her desk drawer. The next morning, she told Lily she needed to visit her sister for a few days. David offered to drive her, but she refused gently. "You've done enough already," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. When she left, the sun was rising over the fields. The farmhouse shrank behind her in the rearview mirror, small and distant, like a memory fading too soon. She didn't cry until the road curved out of sight. Back at the house, David stood on the porch long after she was gone. The air was still, heavy with things unspoken. He thought about calling after her, about saying something, anything to change what had just happened. But he didn't. Instead, he watched the horizon, the same place he'd looked months before, when everything had begun. The same fields, the same light. Only now, he felt the emptiness of it all, the ache of something that had lived only in glances and silences. He didn't know if she'd ever come back. But he knew he would never forget her. Autumn returned with a slow, deliberate grace. The fields were gold again, the sky pale and endless, the air laced with a faint smell of wood smoke. Months had passed since Eleanor had left the farmhouse, yet the memory of that summer lingered in her like a shadow that refused to fade. She had moved to her sister's small cottage near the coast. Quiet, distant, far enough that the world she left behind couldn't reach her easily. But distance did not silence memory. It only made it echo louder. Every morning she walked along the cliff path, the sea restless beneath her, and tried to convince herself that she had done the right thing. She told herself it had been a passing madness, a loneliness misread as something deeper. But on certain mornings when the light struck the water just so, she saw his face in her mind, and the ache returned as fresh as the first day she had felt it. David. She hadn't heard from him. Not once. That was good, she told herself, necessary. But sometimes when she picked up her phone late at night, her fingers hovered over his name in old messages, and she wondered if he ever thought of her too. Lily called often, cheerful and loving, telling her about the renovations they were doing, about the plans for a small business, about everything except the thing that couldn't be spoken. Each time Eleanor heard her daughter's voice, guilt crawled quietly back into her chest. And yet, under the guilt, something softer still remained, something that refused to die, no matter how much she wished it would. One afternoon in late October, the phone rang again. It was Lily. "Mom, you should come home for a few days," her daughter said. "The trees look beautiful, and Dad's been asking about you. We miss you." Eleanor hesitated. "I don't know, sweetheart. It's a long drive. Please. David's been fixing up the barn. He could use your opinion. You always know how to make things look good." That last line twisted something inside her. Lily said it innocently, unaware of the quiet weight behind it. "I'll think about it," Eleanor said softly. But later that night, she found herself packing a bag. The road home felt both familiar and strange, each curve carrying a memory she had tried to bury. When she finally turned down the gravel path leading to the farmhouse, the air seemed to still. The house stood just as she'd left it. White walls, ivy climbing the porch, the field stretching wide and silent around it. David's truck was parked by the barn. She saw movement through the window, him bent over something, sleeves rolled up, working just as he always had. For a moment she almost turned back. But then the door opened and Lily appeared, smiling, arms wide. "Mom!" Eleanor forced a smile and stepped into her daughter's embrace. "Hello, darling." The house smelled the same. Wood polish, apples, faint traces of paint. Only one thing was different. The tension in the air had thickened, though no one else seemed to notice it but her. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low, Eleanor wandered outside. The fields shimmered gold in the dying light, and the barn door stood open. Inside, David was working on a broken window frame. He didn't notice her at first. When he finally looked up, he froze. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. "Eleanor," he said quietly. "David." Her name in his voice still did something to her, something she wished it didn't. "I wasn't expecting you," he said, setting his tools aside. "Lily invited me. She said you could use my opinion." A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Of course she did." Silence settled between them, thick and fragile. The smell of sawdust filled the air. "You've been busy," she said finally. "Trying to be." There was a pause, not awkward but heavy with everything unsaid. "You look well," he added. "So do you," she replied. Then after a moment, "You and Lily, you're all right?" He nodded. "We're fine." He hesitated. "She's happy." Eleanor's throat tightened. "Good." For a while, the only sound was the wind rattling the loose boards. "I didn't think I'd see you again," he said. "I didn't think I'd come back." "Why did you?" She looked at him, then really looked. "Because I missed my home." And because some things shouldn't end with silence. His eyes softened, and she could see the struggle behind them. Guilt, longing, regret, all tangled into one impossible knot. "I never stopped thinking about that night," he admitted. "Neither did I," she whispered. "That's why I left." He closed his eyes briefly, exhaling as if the words themselves hurt. "I know." A sudden gust of wind swept through the open doorway, scattering dust and leaves across the floor. Eleanor turned toward the sound, blinking against the light. "You should finish before the rain comes," she said softly, her voice trembling just enough to betray her. He took a step forward, just one, and stopped. "Eleanor, don't." She held his gaze steady this time. "We can't go back. We can't fix what wasn't meant to happen." "I'm not asking to fix it," he said quietly. I need you to know that it mattered." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't look away. "I already know." And with that, she turned and walked out into the fading light, the fields whispering around her like witnesses to everything that would remain unspoken. Behind her, she could hear the faint sound of him calling her name, once softly like a prayer swallowed by the wind. She didn't turn back. That night the rain returned. It was softer this time, gentler. A steady whisper on the roof, as if the world itself was trying not to disturb what little peace they had left. The farmhouse was quiet. Lily had gone to bed early, tired after a long day. Eleanor sat by the fire, a cup of tea cooling in her hands. The flames flickered, casting light across the familiar room. The old bookshelves, the worn rug, the photographs that told the story of a family she had tried so hard to keep whole. She stared at one picture in particular. Lily and David, smiling, their arms around each other on their wedding day. So much promise, so much trust. And yet, here she was, sitting in the ruins of her own silence. A soft knock broke her thoughts. She looked up. David stood in the doorway, hesitating. "I couldn't sleep," he said quietly. Eleanor set her cup down. "You shouldn't be here." "I know. But if I don't say this now, I never will." Something in his tone, not desperate, not reckless but weary, made her chest tighten. She gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit." He did, his hands clasped together, his eyes fixed on the fire. "I keep trying to understand," he began, "what it was that pulled me toward you. It wasn't supposed to happen. You're right, we crossed lines even by thinking it. But it wasn't just loneliness, Eleanor. It was you. Your strength. The way you see things no one else does. You reminded me of something real, something I'd lost." His voice trembled slightly. "And I hate myself for it." Eleanor felt tears sting her eyes, but she didn't look away. "We both do. I've tried to forget," he continued, "but some things stay. Every time I walk into a room you touched, the kitchen, the garden, even the sound of the wind in the fields, I remember you standing there. And it hurts because I know I shouldn't." She reached for her cup again, but her hands were shaking. "David, what we felt wasn't evil. It was human. But we can't let it destroy everything else." He looked up at her, eyes full of exhaustion and longing. "Then tell me how to stop feeling it." Eleanor's breath caught. "If I knew that," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "I wouldn't still be here." For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Then she stood, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "I'm leaving in the morning." He looked startled. "So soon? I shouldn't have come back at all. This house, it's hers, your life is hers. I'm just a ghost haunting something that doesn't belong to me." "Don't say that. It's true." Her voice shook. "Every look, every word we've shared since I arrived. It's a betrayal, even if we never touched. I won't be the reason your marriage becomes another memory you regret." He rose then as if to reach for her, but stopped himself halfway. "You think walking away will make it easier?" "No," she said softly. "But it's the only way it won't get worse." They stood facing each other, the air between them trembling with everything that could never be said. Finally she whispered, "Goodbye, David." And this time she meant it. The next morning she left before dawn. Mist rolled low over the fields, wrapping the world in a soft gray haze. The earth smelled of rain and endings. David stood by the barn as her car started down the road, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He didn't wave and she didn't look back. Inside the house, Lily stirred, calling out for her mother, but Eleanor was already gone. She had left a note on the kitchen table, short, simple, final. "Some things are meant to stay unspoken. Take care of each other." Months passed. Winter came early that year, frosting the fields white and silent. Life in the farmhouse went on. Dinners, work, quiet mornings, and days that blurred together. David said little about her departure, and Lily didn't ask much. Sometimes, though, when the snow fell heavy and the wind howled against the windows, he found himself glancing at the empty chair by the fire, half expecting her to be there. One evening, as he was repairing a fence post, Lily came out to him, scarf wrapped tight around her neck. "You think Mom will visit for Christmas?" she asked. He hesitated. "Maybe." "I hope so," Lily said, smiling faintly. "She loves the snow here." He nodded, forcing a small smile in return. "Yeah, she does." And as she turned back toward the house, David looked up at the gray sky, a breath escaping him in the cold air. The ache was still there, dulled now but not gone. It had become something quieter, something he had learned to live with. He knew he would never speak her name in that way again. But in some unguarded part of him, she would always remain. Not as temptation, not as guilt, but as a reminder of the fragile, impossible thing they had once almost become. Far away by the coast, Eleanor stood by her window, watching snow fall over the water. She had rebuilt a kind of peace for herself, tending her sister's garden, reading in the evenings, living simply. But every now and then she would dream of the farmhouse, the sound of the wind in the fields, the smell of rain on wood, and a man standing in the doorway, saying her name like it still meant something. She would wake before dawn, heart aching and calm all at once, and whisper into the empty room, "It mattered." Then she'd rise, make tea, and face another quiet day, one where love no longer burned, but glowed faintly like the last ember of a long, beautiful fire. Years had passed since Eleanor had left the farmhouse. Life had continued its quiet rhythm, carrying both of them forward yet leaving shadows of the past in every corner. Eleanor had grown used to the sound of the sea, to the smell of salt and wind in her hair, to evenings spent reading by the firelight. She had learned to measure her days by the soft rise and fall of the tides, and yet some mornings she awoke to a memory that clung like mist: the farmhouse, the fields, and the weight of a presence she had never fully released. David, too, had continued with life as it demanded. The farmhouse remained, filled with laughter and warmth thanks to Lily's energy and care, but there were moments when he felt the stillness, a space untouched by conversation or work, and he remembered Eleanor there. He never spoke of it aloud. The memory was theirs alone, a fragile thread stretched across time. One crisp autumn afternoon, fate nudged them back together. Lily had invited Eleanor for a short visit. Nothing planned, just a few days to see the harvest, the changing leaves, and to remind her mother that this place would always be home. Eleanor had hesitated at first, but the longing for closure, the need to see the world she had once left, finally won. When she arrived, the house looked the same. The ivy climbing the porch, the fields stretching wide and golden, the air carrying the scent of wood smoke and earth. David was outside, repairing the fence along the northern edge of the property. His movements were deliberate, careful, yet there was a grace to them that Eleanor had always admired. He looked up as the car door clicked, and for a moment neither moved. Time seemed to pause. "Eleanor," he said softly, almost a whisper. She smiled faintly, a mixture of warmth and restraint. "David. Good to see you," he said, setting down his tools. "You too," she replied. They stood in silence for a long moment, the autumn wind carrying leaves across the fields like fleeting memories. Neither dared to speak too much. The past had left its mark, and both knew words could undo what had been preserved by distance. Inside, Lily rushed to greet her mother, pulling her into a tight hug. "Mom, I missed you so much," she exclaimed. Eleanor smiled, letting herself be pulled along, laughing softly at the ease of her daughter's love. David followed at a discreet distance, watching the reunion quietly. He didn't intrude. He didn't need to. Everything that had once burned between them now existed only in subtle glances, the unspoken acknowledgement of a shared history that could no longer threaten what they had built. Later, Eleanor wandered to the kitchen window, looking out over the fields where the light of late afternoon turned the grass gold. David joined her quietly. He didn't touch her, didn't speak at first. They only watched the world together, sharing a silence that had become easier to hold over the years. "You've done well here," she said finally. He nodded. "It's home." "Home," she echoed softly, letting the word linger. For a while, they simply stood, the wind brushing past them, carrying memories of rainstorms and quiet nights, of conversations that had never crossed the line, of a bond that had endured despite the distance. That evening, the family gathered for dinner. Candles flickered on the table, casting gentle light on familiar faces. The conversation was lively, centered on the harvest, on plans for the winter, and on small-town news. Eleanor smiled often, her eyes occasionally meeting David's across the table. There was a softness there now, a quiet understanding that had grown from the years of separation. After dinner, Eleanor retired to the porch for a moment of solitude. The night was calm, the sky scattered with stars. She held a cup of tea in her hands, feeling the warmth seep through the ceramic into her fingers. David joined her, standing a respectful distance away. "Beautiful night," he said. "Very," she replied. They talked, carefully, gently, about things that had no weight: the weather, the harvest, Lily's ambitions. And yet beneath the words, there was an unspoken acknowledgement. The past existed, but it no longer controlled them. When the conversation ended, Eleanor stood, turning to face the fields one last time. "It's good to be home," she said. David nodded, his eyes meeting hers. "It is." They shared a brief, silent moment, a kind of farewell, though neither called it that. It was more a recognition of what had been, and what had survived in the quiet corners of their hearts. The night deepened, and Eleanor returned indoors. She found herself looking at a small drawer in the study, one she had left years ago. Inside was the note she had written, folded neatly. She touched it gently, a soft smile on her lips. Time had passed, but the feeling of that night, of the storm and the weight of choices, remained. David found her there moments later. He didn't ask about the note. He didn't need to. They understood each other now in ways that words could never capture. "Eleanor," he said softly, "I'm glad you came." She smiled, a mixture of relief and quiet contentment. "So am I." Outside, the wind rustled the leaves, carrying the gentle promise of seasons yet to come. And for the first time in years, both of them felt the weight of the past lift. Not erased, not forgotten, but transformed into something lighter, something that could exist in memory without pain. The morning came crisp and quiet, the kind of morning where the sky seemed endless and the world felt untouched. Eleanor rose early, walking to the edge of the fields. Frost sparkled on the grass, delicate and fleeting. She breathed in the air deeply, savoring the stillness, the way the light fell across the hills, the way the farmhouse stood steadfast behind her. David approached silently, carrying 2 mugs of steaming coffee. He held one out to her. "For the morning," he said softly. "Thank you," she replied, taking it, their fingers brushing ever so slightly. A touch that carried warmth but no weight, a gentle acknowledgement of the history between them. They walked together along the edge of the fields, not speaking of the past, but feeling its presence in each step. Sometimes silence can speak louder than words, and this morning, their shared silence said everything that needed to be said. "You've done a wonderful job here," Eleanor said finally. "It's alive again." David nodded, glancing over the fields. "It's thanks to you too, in a way. Your vision, even from afar, kept me going." She smiled faintly, a mixture of gratitude and melancholy. "I never meant to leave. Not truly." "You didn't," he said quietly. "You just needed to find your way. And now you have." They stopped by an old oak, its branches reaching skyward. The wind played through the leaves, carrying them in gentle arcs. Eleanor felt the weight of years lift slightly, replaced by a calm she hadn't known in a long time. "I think we've both healed," she whispered. David looked at her, eyes soft. "Yes, we have." They shared a long, measured look, a look that carried all the unspoken words, all the memories, all the love and longing that had never crossed the line but had shaped both of them. There was no guilt here now, only acknowledgement, and the quiet peace of acceptance. Lily joined them shortly after, her laughter ringing through the crisp air. "Mom, Dad, come see the barn," she called, her energy bright and unrestrained. Eleanor and David exchanged a glance, a private smile passing between them. Whatever had existed before, whatever could have undone them, had settled into memory, a delicate thread that no longer threatened to unravel their lives. They spent the day together, working, talking, laughing. It was normal in the most extraordinary way. The ease of family, the bond of shared history, the joy of presence. And beneath it all, the unspoken understanding lingered. They had survived their feelings, and in doing so, had preserved what was most important, the love for their family and the respect for themselves. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Eleanor packed her bag. Her visit was over. She had come for closure, and she had found it. David walked her to the car, standing close but not too close. The air was filled with the scent of earth and late-blooming flowers. "Take care, Eleanor," he said quietly. "You too, David," she replied. They shared a final look, a long, steady gaze that spoke of respect, gratitude, and the lingering echo of what once was. Neither needed to speak further. When she drove away, the farmhouse receded behind her. The wind carried the faint sound of leaves brushing against the windows, and she felt a gentle peace settle in her chest. Months passed. Seasons changed. Snow melted into spring, buds appeared, and life moved forward. Eleanor returned to the coast, embracing the rhythm of her home and the life she had rebuilt. David continued at the farmhouse, tending the fields, maintaining the house, cherishing the laughter and love he shared with Lily. And though memories of Eleanor lingered, they were no longer sharp, no longer aching. They existed as gentle reminders of a time when passion had been restrained, love had been complicated, and hearts had been tested. One quiet evening, Eleanor received a letter. It was from David, brief and simple. Some things are meant to be remembered, not relived. Thank you for being part of what made this place whole. Take care of yourself. She smiled softly, folding the note carefully. She placed it beside the tea set on her kitchen table. A small, tangible reminder that some connections endure quietly, without interference, without danger, simply as memories held gently in the heart. Outside, the wind carried the scent of the sea and the faint rustle of leaves. Eleanor stepped to the window, watching the waves catch the light of the setting sun. And for the first time in a long time she felt complete, not because she had what she had once wanted, but because she had found the calm in what remained. David, miles away, stood on the porch of the farmhouse, gazing over the fields. He held a quiet contentment in his chest, a knowledge that what had been would always remain part of him, but no longer controlled him. The house was alive, the family thriving, and the years ahead stretched before him, filled with possibility. And somewhere between memory and reality, they both understood. The love they had shared, unspoken and restrained, had transformed into something enduring. Not a love that demanded, not a love that consumed, but a love that had matured into respect, gratitude, and peace. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the echo of laughter, of conversations, of moments that could never return. And both Eleanor and David, separated by distance yet united by understanding, finally let the past rest. The world moved on as it always does. And they, in their own ways, had found their place within it.